All right. Claims we're live. So it's June 21st, 2023. That's like first day of summer territory. If not today, is it tomorrow?
I think it is today.
Yeah, it very well might be today. Wednesday, June 21st, summer
Yep.
solstice 2023. So welcome to summer, everybody. And here in the Southeast Philadelphia region, it's a little, at least for me, it's a little overcast and was kind of like windy, like that precursor to a storm morning. So definitely summer.
Yeah.
Weather's a little cooler, I think, than we expect for summer.
Very true.
And if I remember correctly, we're getting some rain this weekend. So definitely not spring weather. It's summer for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we're getting maybe getting some rain tonight and into
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I finally have tickets to a Phillies game tomorrow.
Oh, do you? Oh, these seasons,
I know.
So how's it going? Good morning to you here on this Wednesday.
Good morning. Yeah, it's been it's not been a smooth morning. I'll put it that
Oh
way.
yeah,
I
yeah.
got a good ways here. Realized I didn't have my wallet, and we've got this
Uh-oh.
event tonight, and I kind of need that just in case.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's
just
right.
you
Won't
kind of
help.
ping me.
Yeah, it's okay. I was gonna say it won't help the folks who are watching this in the future, but yeah, there's a great developer event that Microsoft's putting on tonight in the Springfield area, but you do have to sign up for it. So if you just happen to be, if you're one of like the 0 people that are watching live right now, at least according to the counter. But right now, again, these shows have been unannounced for a period of time while we're kind of figuring out how we're going to get this going. And maybe I know people love both the Twitch and the YouTube scheduling features, and that's how they used to figure out before what was going on. So maybe if that gets a little bit more more consistent, then we'll be able to do that.
So are we just live on YouTube? That's it?
No, we're still live on both.
Okay.
There is some sorting out going on with if folks. So again, here we are in June of 2023. If you're a regular Twitch user, you've probably seen the drama in the last couple of weeks. So if you're watching in the future, that doesn't mean anything to you. But Twitch has made a lot of announcements that may or may not have affect where we can stream, and that's all being figured out as we speak. So we'll see. I know I would love to add a few more places, but we'll see.
Yes. Those are, yeah. It's always tried to find the right balance between reach and, oversaturating or making it more complicated for us on the stream to do what we need to do.
Yeah. The one thing is a lot of people may have noticed, or if you watch a lot of streams, like we've been trying out StreamYard lately. It's worked pretty well. I love broadcasting with OBS and kind of being in control of that whole thing. Like it's really fun, but this is awfully easy to just sit down and click and it starts and it works. And we also get chat from both channels and that just works. And that's pretty cool. So in any case, Rich, you talked to me this week about some issues with Git specifically, and it doesn't really have anything to do with some of the stuff we usually talk about, which is the commit graph and I've kind of gotten hosed up in a way where I'm just really having trouble merging, or I can't figure out how to get back to what the rest of my teammates are doing. This is a totally different issue, but it definitely a very valid use case that I just didn't know the answer to. And it sounds like you made a little breakthrough there.
Yeah, I think, and trust me, I had all of those issues this week as well. But I think we've wound up talking about them enough that I think I was able to kind of work my way through some of those. But where I ran into a problem was, and I'm sure other people may be running into this too. I have a GitHub account, and I'm sure 100 million plus developers out there have GitHub accounts and that are basically able to connect to essentially GitHub.com, right? And where I ran into a problem is I now have a GitHub enterprise account as part of some of the things we're doing internally. And what was interesting was in the past, I would just go through the command line. That's typically how I would work. And maybe we should just Let me see if I can share my screen.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you have it in here, we'll bring it up.
Present. It doesn't call it share. They call it present. Screen. Yeah, I know. Easiest on 2 monitors. Oh, I can't. Oh, shoot. If I do, then I can't. Hang on. this
That's all
this
right.
is the first. This is the first. Oh, I can do a window. Okay, I thought it was going to force me to do.
Like a whole desktop. Yeah.
That's what it was looking like. Yeah. All right, so let's do that. So if I do a window, now where do you go?
Okay.
Nice, and it's this window. Should be this window. So if I do this, nice. Okay, so it's the front one, which is what I wanted. So this is just a, if I was to say, hey, let's go ahead and I think what project I was working in. No, it was Razor we were in. Oh no, sorry. And we do. It was Telnet Control. So this is just an application that I'm building internally to kind of build out a set of common DLLs to access some of the applications that we have internally. But if we look at Git and we do Git remotes, it should list my remote, and I do have one. So remote get URL, and that particular URL there points to my my internal or my enterprise instance of GitHub, right? So that's my account. That's my that's essentially where I was able to push this. Now, if I go to, probably a better way to show this is to, let's do this. Hold that for a second. GitHub.com. If I'm in here, I'm in my particular repository, and let's just go to me, my profile. So this is internal. This is GitHub Enterprise. If I want to go to a repository and create a new repo, and let's do that. So this is something simple like that. We'll keep it private. That's fine. We're not going to put anything in it. I'm just going to put a repo. If I bring this repo, if I try and clone this repo, I believe that's where we're going to run into the issue. So let's copy this URL back to here. All right. Paste and vertical and empty repository. So now it works. That's interesting.
Well, part of the issue you were having was, you said you have your own personal GitHub account, and then you go to work, and there is an enterprise account. And we were talking about this offline, saying, how do you deal with this going back and forth? And I actually realized that part of how I solve the problem is that I do most of my work stuff on my work laptop, and I do everything else. And that's not exactly an elegant solution, except for the fact that it just happens to work for me. So it turned out that what I think you discovered is that each there's the git config file that we're all used to, the global git config.
Yeah.
You were able to put configs in each of the in a project, specifically in a project. And then what Git does is it sort of melds the two. And just like you're doing there when you say git config -- list, I think this is the melding of your local and the external.
Yeah, and if you see this one here, it's already got that origin URL in there, which is interesting.
Okay, and you just clone this down?
I just cloned this down. So that's Right. And that's kind of so starting to think through this, right? So now if I go to git config -e, so I can edit that file, and that's going
Yep.
to open it up for me inside of VS Code, because that's my I created that as my default editor. It included, because of the origin that's in here, it included that remote, and it understands because I have a entry in the credentials manager to handle this account at github.com with a personal access token. I'm able to go ahead and authenticate to it that way. But I'm guessing because we brought it down, it said, well, that's remote. And I understand this because it matches. So interesting.
Here, go ahead and bump that up a couple more font sizes. I'm looking at it in another screen here just to.
Is that better?
I think so. There it goes. Yeah, it's a little more readable there. So cool. So like you said, it cloned it down. It's going to know what the remote is, and then the interesting thing there is still for me, it's I thought so. Here's another thing that's interesting: is you're doing a git clone using an HTTPS remote,
right?
And this is part of the issue. Which I will be honest, I actually tend to do the same thing. This is where when you were showing the list of configs a little bit earlier, there's Git credential manager. The credential manager just said manager, which I believe means in Windows means use the Windows credentials system, which is a system that like it's kind of even longtime Windows users don't really understand it that well. And I will admit that I was one of them until very recently. And so what it's doing is Windows has built-in credential management, and it's saying, okay, I'm going to manage this credential. The very first time you tried to clone something from Git, it popped up a little login screen. You went ahead and entered your credentials, and then you never had to do it again. Or maybe you didn't even have to enter your credentials. Sometimes it's sophisticated enough that it might go ahead and do your two-factor auth or something, and then it's just going to store those away, and they are scrolled away in Windows.
Yep. And if you look at it, there's a long list, and you'll probably recognize things that you've signed into. It's like, oh, okay, now I understand.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, I've worked at a few places that use Artifactory, and then what they do to lock it down is they use Windows domain, your Windows domain. And this is, it's so funny how the world is changing. So for a very long time, your domain credentials were kind of like your keys to the kingdom. But as enterprises have slowly moved towards an Azure Active Directory stance, and then I'm not an expert in this, but I've suspected for a long time there must be a hybrid kind of way to do things where your Windows domain still works when you log in, and I'm definitely logging in with my Windows domain credentials with the traditional domain / username and then whatever. But my email address typically at the firm, at the organization, could also be logged into too using the Azure Active Directory stuff. And so it gets real confusing. And I constantly find myself everywhere I go making notes of like, okay, log into this with Windows domain, log into this with email.
Okay.
And that's kind of painful, but here's the thing is I sort of know what's going on. Well, so Artifactory, at least the particular setup that I'm referencing here, in order to get that NuGet feed to work in Visual Studio would just pop up a little that old school Windows domain login thing. It's about this big and it's just real small, and it would punch it into Windows credentials, into that Windows credential manager. It'd punch it in there. So then what would happen is we would have a 90-day or 180-day or something password change, and all of a sudden all my builds would fail, saying I can't reach the Artifactory. And you'd sit there scratching your head, what's going on? And it was, we'll go to the Windows Credential Manager and delete the Artifactory credential that was saved. And then then Visual Studio is going to prompt you again, and then it works. And it's like, wow, that stinks. Like, it's just not, it's too bad that it's not more integrated. So a lot of Windows users, I think, clone the way you just did. What would
Yeah.
be really interesting on this show, and maybe this is something to do next time, is I think a lot of the reason why we tend to do this is because SSH seems difficult in Windows. Um, I even think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding that if you want to use SSH with Git, you've got to use Git Bash.
Okay.
And I don't use Git Bash. And I haven't used Git Bash for a very long time. And it's not because I have anything against Git Bash. It's I
Yeah.
love the experience right within PowerShell, right within command prompt, the terminals that I'm already using.
Okay.
So it turns out SSH in these terminals is not only possible, it's really not that hard, but it's
Right.
just not turned on by default. So no one knows how to do it.
Interesting.
So we'll have to look at that next time. But
Okay.
this time,
and I think
yeah.
what I want to do is I want to close that window that's here, right? So this is what
Okay.
the GitHub config looks like. So let's close
Yep.
that so I get some control back on this side, and I get my prompt back here, which is good. What I want to do is let's go back a bit and let's do let's just do something really quick. We could do .NET new console app, right? We'll call we'll put it in the git auth test folder and call it git auth test, right? Just something simple like that. Now what I'm doing is I'm doing that so that A, it creates the project, but B, so it creates a folder for me to put this into. So now if I go into git auth test, I've got a project that essentially is not a Git repository yet. It's just a project that is what you would expect, a console app. That's it. So from here, if I go ahead and say git init, and it's attempted to init that project for me, it works.
Yep.
So I can go ahead and do my git add, all that fun stuff, git commit. Right. And that's all cool. So that's all in there. What it doesn't have is it doesn't have any idea of what the remote is, right? Because Git being a decentralized or distributed version control system, it can stand alone and never need to talk to any other environment whatsoever.
Yep. It's a first-class repository, just like all the rest of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this is just as authoritative, I guess, as you storing your code on somebody else's machine or in GitHub proper or in GitHub Enterprise, right? It could stand alone and live that way. What I want to do is let's go back to this, not this one, because why not? We'll just go ahead and create another repository. Simple git test. Add a README, sure, why not? Actually, no, I don't. That's the other issue that we'll wind up into with.
So this is a great. You might have to bump it up a little so I can see.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Is you can create a repository with no commits. That's fine. Yeah. Don't add a README. Don't add anything. And look, I bet you people watching. When you do a git init locally, how many people watching have the workflow of I'm not going to git init locally. Let me go to GitHub, start a new repository, clone it, and then I actually created the project over here, so I'm going to move my code in. Mm-hmm. That is a common workflow because you kind of get in this space of thinking like, well, I don't know what to do. I can't go create the repository there because then I clone it and now it's cats and dogs living together. Like it's okay. You're fine. Create a blank repository. Perfectly fine.
And that's what we did with the previous one, right? We did the auth test. The thing that we're not going to do here.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Is we're not going to clone it. And I think what happens then is, and maybe you're working between a couple of different remotes for whatever reason. And just to kind of prove your point, if you do that empty repository, this is the information it gives you, and it walks you through where
pushing
are
the
you
existing
right now.
Repo. Yeah.
And these are all things that we could find ourselves in, importing from another repo, pushing existing, or creating a new repository from the command line, right? All of those are things that we might run into, and there's a way for you to get from new GitHub repository to get my code running regardless of where it exists. So with that, we're actually going to kind of follow what's going along here. In
Okay.
that, hey, I've got a local repository, and I got to change. There's I don't know why it still comes down when it creates. We still have it be main or
Right.
master locally,
Yeah.
um, and there's a Git global setting for that.
Yes. I don't remember what it is though.
No, um, it's gonna let me do
And
it.
it might be one of those additive things where you're not going to see the setting until you add it. So, you know what? Let's look it up real quick.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna do.
Branch config. How to change the default branch. Looks like so there so you've got what looks like an old, I mean, it looks like an old school ini file, although it's not.
Mm-hmm.
The category you want is called init, but that's a category, so it's not in core. So just like core is a category and user is a category.
There you go.
Oh, actually, apparently you can just do that too. Sorry. So
Co-pilot to the rescue. So
yeah, so I think I'm gonna guess that works. Otherwise, the doc that I'm looking at, just so,
yep.
so everybody knows, is that you would make a new category called init, and then under there you would say default branch equals main. I'd be very curious to know if this works, I actually believe it probably does, because if I know Git, it it's probably like, hey, it is part of core, but if you wanted to break it out, then you know.
Let's do this. Boom. Make
That's actually a
directory.
really interesting thought too. Is the the tension between customizing your own environment and the default, right? Because I've had this talk, quite frankly, forever. Uh, wow, we're going back a long way, but I had a good buddy that I worked with out when I was in Carlsbad, California. His name was Dan Hannon, and I don't mind shouting him out because uh, he was on the Tablet Show once with
Oh
Rich
wow.
and Carl. So I figure, hey, you know, he's already in the public sphere, and besides, it'd be cool to chat with him again.
Yeah.
He asked me one day about, we had this talk about customizing Visual Studio, and this was a long time ago. And he was very firmly into how hard he tries not to, so that way he can sit down at any machine and he knows all the shortcuts, where all the menus are, everything, like nothing's changed, nothing's been moved. I do believe that was a time in history when our settings didn't travel very well from machine to machine.
Yes.
And it was also a time when you would actually go install Visual Studio in a lab that you were going to go work in. So
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't your copy to own, other people were going to sit there too. I would say times have changed, and maybe but it's interesting to see, like, now you're customizing Git. So then someone else is going to say, well, wait a second, my Git doesn't do that.
Right. And that's yeah. And I think there are I don't know. I think that's, a lot of those
Uh-huh.
things are made to be able to be customized because the more comfortable you are in that
Yeah.
environment, the quicker you're going to be. I mean, that's why, not to put a plug in, but
Oh,
oh
yeah,
my
yeah. Well, I
gosh.
mean, look, you got it up on screen. You got Oh My Posh on
Exactly, right?
screen, using it for PowerShell. I use it for PowerShell,
Yep,
and I also like using it in Bash as well. So
definitely. All right, well, let's finish out this test. I'll close out the git config, so that's all saved. So all I'm going to do is git init a new repo. It didn't like that config.
oh, interesting.
Interesting. Okay. Um, so maybe we need to go back and so this I ran into as well, right? So if we look at
Well, we can try a couple things. So
I can yeah, I know I can wow, that's true. All right, I will let you go and explain because I know how I did it when it was the project config. I'm not sure where I actually went looking for the globals yesterday and did not see that either.
so I'm wondering if that command line, how that will modify the config file.
Hmm. Oh, okay.
Um, because you don't have to, I mean, opening the file is great. At the same time, we can also modify it from command line. And we're saying init default branch is the one we want, which might be a capital B.
Okay.
And
And
then
then
you're
just space and then main as the value,
yeah,
right? So key in a value.
Yep. Now, okay, so it just doesn't like it. So let's open up the git config file.
Oh, well, there it is. Sorry, it's telling me where it is.
Yeah.
Or
okay. Like you did before, you did git, you did the global -e, right?
Yeah, but when you do that down here, back config, right? So it's not even letting you do the edit.
Oh, I see.
So
yeah, I gotcha. Wow, so this is a good lesson, right? If your git config is bad, you're in trouble.
Well, you just have to know where to look.
Yeah.
Not enough coffee. I can't type this morning. So they got that. We do Explorer.
Explorer dot. That's funny. I do start dot all the time.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not sure how long Explorer dot has worked. Maybe longer, maybe less time. For some reason, I got hooked on start dot a very long time ago.
And I'm not seeing that file here.
Well, you might not be showing your hidden files. I wonder if you could just code straight to it. If you code dot straight to it, like, code to the folder or to the file. Okay.
Oh, it did work. It let me in.
Yeah, because code is just code. Git was like, sorry, it's invalid. I'm not even gonna because I think what that command does when you say -e, I think what that command does is first it prints the config file.
Okay.
Like if you were in Bash, it would be the same as a cat, but then it pipes it or redirects it out to your default editor, which is Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code's ready for that. And so to us, it looks like it's opening in Visual Studio Code, but it's doing it in a very Linuxy way. So in any case.
So now we should be able to try this.
Yeah. My curiosity here is I want to go see what that file looks like now. Right. So if you were to code back into it, just to take a look. Okay, so it was what we suggested originally. And so here's a case where GitHub Copilot recognizes what you're trying to do, but gives you the wrong form factor. It gave you the command line form factor.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is why you need to, have a good bit of, intelligence around what you're doing to be able to prevent yourself from doing that. Or when you accept it, you see what happens sometimes.
Or you find out what happens. And you remember where the git config file is so you can get to it directly.
Exactly.
So in any case.
So this is good. We're learning a lot here. And we're playing around with Git, I think, more than we originally thought we might. But so we've got that. If I do git status, I don't think it actually repository we're in that. Okay.
Were you going to create another new project or?
I wasn't. I was just going to create the new repo because it was just going to be a test to make sure that main would be in there and make sure this didn't go right. It's not a Git repository. So now if I do git init, it should create a repository that is now, in here on main. Woo, success.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Taking us back to our other test. All right. So now that we sidetracked, we fixed that issue. We have our application here. Let's just clean things up a little bit because we were in and out of different stuff. Okay. And we can close this window as well. Oop. I thought that was going to close one window and not two. My fault. All right. Cool. All right. Back where we were.
You'll just want to make that font a lot bigger.
Oh, that's right. And
Yeah.
probably do this so you can see everything. There we go. Okay. I think I haven't done this for a while, Chris. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. We don't have as much real estate in StreamYard either. So like I've been making stuff almost annoyingly big because
Mm-hmm.
we just don't.
It does take away it takes away our real estate too when we do it that way, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So the thought here is I've got a Git repo and I don't have any remotes because we just created it all locally. What I want to do is, can I take that new project that we created that was going to be a test, copy
Yep.
that URL and say git remote add. You're going to call it, instead of origin, you can call it, keep it or by default origin. I like to call it, the location or the environment that I'm pushing it to. So in this case, I'm doing that, and that's going to be that location. When I do this, I now have a remote that is that repository that's sitting up in the enterprise version of GitHub. But if I go ahead and do git add, and then git commit on main branch of commit. Really? Everything's in there? Okay. Awesome. Then do a git push.
Okay. No
Upstream
upstream. Yeah.
branch. Yeah. So that's common. We see that all the time, right? We'll do a U, MSFT out to main.
It's acting like it's got it figured out though, which wasn't the problem you were having the other day.
Which isn't exactly this now maybe. So here's an interesting thing, right? If I do git config -e on the project, it's already dropped this in here.
And that's the thing you were adding yourself, or you were actually doing something more. You were putting in a credential.
Well, I did. Oh, that's right. I put it in as a credential.
Yeah. There was something you were doing with the credential section, which was totally brand new to me.
Yeah. And I thought I needed it because I put it in the credential manager and that did not seem to be enough. And I'm trying to see where we pasted it in the chat earlier. Image, right? So we were doing something like, I'm trying to think of the right way to bring this over.
So it says here, for example, so we have a credential helper, and we know that because I'm pretty sure that if you did the full git config, the global config, you're going to see your credential helper is called manager, which I think is just ends up being the Windows credential manager.
Yes.
And you were putting in that exactly. So when Git looks into a config, Git considers each credential to have a context defined by its URL. This context is used to look up context-specific configuration and is passed to any helpers, which may use it as an index into secure storage. For example, imagine we're accessing, and there's a URL here. When Git looks into the config file to see if a section matches this context, it will consider the two a match if the context is a more specific subset of the pattern. So you were saying, I see, you're saying that that you're basically telling Git that whenever I'm going to a repository owned by rros Microsoft, the username is rros Microsoft. And then what you could do theoretically is have another set for your personal stuff and say the username is that. And then what it does is it goes, okay, I'm going to go see if I can find a credential for rros Microsoft in the credential manager, which in this case happens to be the Windows credential manager, but it could be different on different platforms. If you're on a Mac, it's different. If you're on Linux, it's different.
Yeah.
But what you're trying to do now that is difficult is you're trying to unwind what you did to get yourself working in this both sides scenario. And this is always a problem. I mean,
Yep.
I don't know how many times with demos, half of my issue is how do I unwind to life before this, especially if OSs or software goes around and save things for you.
Yeah.
And like, where did it save it? And it's magical. And but in this case, now
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's some place it's been saved that we'd have to go purge.
Well, the only other edit I made, and I'm not going to show that here,
Yeah.
is the credential manager. So I made an
Right.
entry in credential manager, and you'll see the format when you go through and look at it. The way it, you probably see it for your personal GitHub, right? It's github.com. I think it's you'll see the way it's laid out. And all I did was, to point it to, like you said, that our Ross Microsoft repo is I made an exact entry like that, but then swapped out my GitHub username for that username, and then added the PAT in there as the password. That's the only other. And maybe now it's just smart enough because I've set all that up that anytime I set a repo or remote store up like that, that it pulls that up. That's you, not me.
This is
Okay.
me. Exactly. That's me. And what I'm going to do actually is first I'm going to, because I can't. So first I'm going to actually stop presenting this real quick,
Yeah.
because what I can't do here is I can't show you how I got there. So I have to change this. Let me stop that screen. And then if I say share screen, and we're going to say the entire screen in screen 2. Okay, so this is my Windows desktop. Some people may have never seen this before, but it turns out, and I never remember exactly where this is, so thank goodness for modern Windows where I can just start typing things like
Yep.
Windows credentials, and you're looking for manage Windows credentials, which is in the control panel. It's also known as the credential manager. These are the same thing. I can click on whatever, and what you get, this is very interesting. I can't really zoom in on this that easily, which is kind of a bummer. I could if I would have had Zoom it going. I don't. Maybe I can get going real quickly. Tools, zoom it. I need to just get. I don't know why I don't take the time to just make this part of my default startup. Okay. Isn't it Control 1? That didn't work. Say run zoom when Windows starts. Live zoom is Control 4. Control 4, really? Did I change it? Oh, I see. I accidentally. That was a lot of work to get here. So, you get Windows credentials and web credentials, and what you want are Windows credentials. And if we look through here, all kinds of stuff's been added to my machine. And that's the crazy thing, is you just don't know where all of this is coming from. But the key is here's the one that we kind of care about, is get https github.com. Most of us are going to see this. If you're on Windows, you clone with an HTTPS repo, you use a HTTPS URL, and then one time a long time ago, it asked you for your credentials. This is where they got plopped in. And what'll happen is you'll see that Visual Studio extension will do the same thing. The Git from the command line will do the same thing. A lot of times these different tool sets will store the credentials separately, and they do that on purpose because the Visual Studio team realizes that you might go out to command line and you're thinking like, well, command line I work this way, but in Visual Studio I work this way, and so you'd be frustrated to see the two collide there. So what you end up doing is, if not that this happens with the Git credential manager, but there are sometimes use cases where you're like, oh, well, the credential in here is wrong and it's just not working anymore. So what you do is you come here and you say remove, And the next time it's going to ask me again. In fact, I think if I remove this, I think if I go try to clone something now, it's going to ask me. So I'm going to bring up Windows Terminal. And now I need something to clone. So let's go. Let's head out to GitHub. And here. I don't know what your time is like today. So let's get the URL. This is just a repo of mine. And let's see if it asks me. It might not. The reason it might not is because this is public. Okay. I think because it's public, it doesn't care. So I have a feeling there is a private repository, which is, I'm not worried about it being private. Like, this is not the end of the world. I need a private repository that I think is going to ask me. Oh, come on. Let me think. Is this one private? No. Oh, I can't see any of my own private repositories because I'm not signed in. So let's get that done. And that's, I'm certain, going to ask me for two-factor because apparently I haven't signed into this in a while. Yep. So grabbing my phone and live television, right? Okay. So private. Here we go. Getting the URL. This is not private for any specific reason about the code. But this one, let's find a new spot. Okay, clone here. And I want to say yes, yes. So this time, that was a long way around to get there. But this time, what's happened here is the Git credential manager knows how to, the one that's installed with GitHub, with Git for Windows, knows how to say, okay, let's log in through GitHub. And then what it's going to do is it's going to go store this out in that Windows credential. So like, it's not here now, but I'm basically adding another one. And this is a long way around to what you are doing, right? Except that what you're doing is you're saying, I have multiple accounts and I want to switch back and forth. So I want to make sure that one account login failed. That's interesting. Huh. Okay. I'll have to fix that later. Now that I've in the past, this has worked for me. And you might be on mute, Rich.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I am.
In the past, this has worked for me. And then what it does is it tells me, it basically says to me, you need the two-factor, and it all works, but not working now. Not working now.
Yeah. I'm just realizing I need to switch my monitor around. Because when I look, I'm looking at the monitor over here and I'm looking away from the screen. If I moved it over here, then it looks like I'm looking at your code, which I would be in both real and the video world, but never mind.
Well, we've had a lot of trouble today with this. That's interesting. Now I'm wondering, how am I going to use Git again? That's weird. I find that really strange because this has been very reliable for me. I was super happy when the Git credential manager had built in. That kind of makes me wonder. Do I need to delete more? So I've now deleted 2 credentials. This is one of those things. I think, Rich, I talk about this a lot when we get together, is I'm always fascinated by first-time setup, because
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing, first time setup's the kind of thing we all go through it, and then we might even fight and fight and fight and fight. And then once we solve it, we forget about it because it
Mm-hmm.
might be the kind of thing that we don't do very often.
No, unless you're rebuilding your machine on a quarterly or a weekly basis, or you're always getting access to new machines, which can happen too.
Yeah. And what's frustrating there is that two things can go wrong. One is that the rest of your teammates don't document how they did the first time setup. And then the second thing is that it changes.
Yeah.
It changes out from under you. And so your teammates are like, oh, well, this worked for me. Yeah, but the process changed.
Yep.
So,
yeah. And
yeah.
even the order in which you access those other services, right? Because if you access something ahead of accessing another resource, that can become the primary one. So now you've got to do that for things that you weren't having to do that for in the past, right?
Yep.
Oh, did it work?
No, it hasn't worked. I'm actually beginning to wonder if, here's the next thing I'm going to try. What about from command prompt? Not that I really have a good reason for why this would be the case.
Yeah.
Where is my GitHub repository? Oh, yes, of course it is. I used to know by heart the remove command, and I just don't know it anymore. So I went and did that a different way. Okay, once again, the login's coming up, and it's telling me, hey, you need to log in, and apparently you can use your Now what I'm wondering is maybe I shouldn't be trying to use my username. And no, it says login failed. So that's really interesting. I'm going to try my email address real quick.
Okay.
And that didn't work either. So it wants me to do it here, which I'm just going to try.
It won't come up, but.
And that didn't work. Support for password authentication was removed on August 13th, 2021. Hold on.
Let's take a look.
Yeah, what is that about? Because I thought you could still do this.
Maybe it's time to show your SSH trick.
Well, certainly I do use SSH, and I have. I think it's weird that Git Credential Manager, install Git for Windows. The next time you clone an HTTPS URL, Git will prompt you to log in using a browser window. Yeah, see, that's how odd.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I wonder, though. See how it says that a version install version 2.29 or higher? What's my Git version? Because I forget about this. 2.28.
Oh.
This.
Just missed it.
Look at that. So, is that really it? Is that really what's going on here? Is that Git a couple years ago stopped support for maybe an older version of the Git Credential Manager, which is fine, and it's just worked fine because I probably haven't touched anything in ages. I bet you I haven't, everything's just been fine. And here is Git 2.41, which it's really gonna make me install, huh? Okay, that's fine. I don't care. Let's see, Windows Explorer integration. I don't generally care about Git Bash or Git GUI. Large file support is fine. Wow, I'm actually trying to install Git on the fly here. And that's interesting that Git use, there is a, in the Git setup nowadays, they ask you, do you want to change your default branch name?
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I was wondering when that was going to show up.
Git will not use its, and I turn off, I'm going to turn off use bundled OpenSSH. I'm going to switch to use external OpenSSH. I'm going to have to test all this stuff because I would like to show how to do SSH on Windows maybe next time we get together.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that a lot of us more and more are going to be doing SSH at work anyway, especially as we spend more time in containers.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad idea to just kind of say, hey, I'm just going to use it. What happens with me is I'm such a creature of habit that when I get on a Windows box, I just do the HTTPS clone. I let the credential manager solve the problem for me, and then I don't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
And then you don't think about it for years is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, after all that, I believe this is classic Dev Talk Show, right? Where we're just figuring it out as we're here. So now we're on Git version 2.41.
Nice.
And I've got this temp stuff folder, and I don't think there's anything in here. That's perfectly fine. So now, it's even saying, hey, do you want that is the one I want. And let's see what happens. Sure enough, I got a different looking credential manager that looks to me like it's going to use OAuth/OpenID in order to sign in instead of trying to do it here in Win. So this looks a little different. I probably could go to GitHub and create a personal access token, bring that over. That's certainly a great way to do it. Let's do sign in with the browser. Yeah, so this explains very much why none of this worked. It's opening up a local. It looks to me like it's opening up. Oh, actually. Okay, so it didn't do anything. See that? Now it worked. So I'm trying to figure out now, what did it do? And my guess is that it opened the browser, said you're logged into GitHub. We can ship the credential down, and now it's done.
Yeah.
And
that makes sense.
Even though you
got rid of the github.com from your credential manager, it was still,
look at this.
Yeah.
Modified today, which is cool. That's fine. I'm totally fine with all that. So now it seems to me that it was smart enough that when it was going out to do the OAuth authentication with GitHub, that it's like, but you're already logged in. Like, you're fine. Go ahead and tell Credential Manager to store this credential locally. And so it did.
Yeah.
So now let's remove it, because this is the only way to prove that we know what we're doing. And I don't remember, is it rmdr/something/something gets rid of files and subdirectories? I used to know all that stuff by heart back in the DOS days. I don't know it anymore. So now, because I removed that credential, my expectation is that this is going to ask me to log in again. And sure enough, this is coming up again. And just to kind of, if I go and I say, here's a new tab in my current browser, and I say sign in with my browser, I suspect it's heading out to GitHub with a local web server to do the OpenID authentication. What they kind of don't do well here is they don't bring up any kind of web page to say like, hey, you're cool, go ahead and close this browser window. But I'm clearly okay.
Right.
And we know that when we come back here, there's nothing here, but I think you can, at least I don't think there's anything here, because I don't think this refreshes. It doesn't. So then come back, go to manage Windows credentials, and here's our GitHub token. And the next time I go into Visual Studio, I'm going to have to do the same thing.
You're right.
But that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. So go ahead.
I was going to say before you did. So the only difference between, a difference between that entry that you had there that was just like git:/https github.com and then the user information underneath it. When I created my credential for my enterprise one, it was that same entry, except https rich rross_microsoft at github.com. And by putting that in there, those credentials under, it knew whenever it saw that particular user, that it would go ahead and use that to gain access.
Yep. That's exactly it.
that probably, because of the way that URL is scoped, it would be interesting to see if that would work for other projects in the enterprise versus my own personal stuff.
I think it should, because I mean, that's just a URL with your username. So you're basically saying, if I'm that user and I'm
Go do
going to
this.
github.com, here's the credential you want.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is when you have to manage 2 users in one machine, there's certainly some gotchas. And then here we are. I don't do that, but I managed to get myself in a pickle pretty quickly, because it had been so long since I'd updated Git, apparently, that and we can go to the documentation here on this if I still have it up, which I don't think I do. Yeah. Is Git is basic, the GitHub folks are basically saying, hey, we don't want to support some older methods of doing things. They probably were pretty old, and that's the crazy thing, is you just it's the age old problem. You get stuff set up, but like they
Yeah.
say here, if you're cloning GitHub repositories using HTTPS, we recommend you use the GitHub CLI, which I don't generally do, and I haven't explored too much, or Git Credential Manager, which I thought I was doing. It's just that it was updated back here. We recommend installing the latest version. Install version 2.29 or higher, which is the first version offering OAuth support for GitHub. And that makes sense, because I think originally that was Windows credential support, and now this is OAuth support. And then what happens is it works together with Windows to be like, okay, fine. Like it says here, it's even telling us what we're doing. It tells you exactly what we're doing. The next time you clone an HTTPS URL that requires authentication, Git will prompt you to log in using a browser window. You may first be asked to authorize an OAuth app. If your account requires, you might have to complete 2FA. Fine. Once you've authenticated successfully, your credentials are stored in the Windows Credential Manager. Like, they're telling us exactly what we're doing. So that's cool. I learned something today. Make sure you have a later version of Git.
Can you scroll back up again?
Yeah.
So it's saying automatically store your credentials for when you choose HTTP. So maybe that is what, because I did try the GitHub CLI route, thinking I could use that instead of Git commands to bring my repo, or to push my repo up into that, and I was having some issues there. So I ended up not going down it. But in running the local GitHub CLI command that checks my auth status, I'm logged in as rross_Microsoft, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I wonder if I log out what I, with what I did by adding that remote repo, would it, and if I was logged out, would it have been as successful?
I'm not. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to try, right?
Yep.
So I haven't touched this in a while.
Okay.
But here's a sneak preview for SSH in Windows 10. Is I created this gist so that I would never forget. And I want to say that I probably did this a couple years ago, and then I probably revised it. And I think as a reflex action, when people install Git for Windows, it's going to install Git Bash, which I actually just told it not to do.
Okay.
And so I'm actually curious now if I try to find Git Bash. See, it's still on the machine. So I'm not sure if maybe that's from older, because it used to be that you didn't have an option there. At least I don't remember having an option there. And again, I was kind of the use case. I used to see people do this all the time. I used to see people work, and they would work in their command prompt, or they would work in Visual Studio, or they'd work in whatever, and then they would like open Git Bash to say like, oh, well, I've got to commit this to Git, and they would open Git Bash, and I just thought like, gosh, this seems unnecessary. So, I don't have a way that a lot of people did this was they would like use PuTTY or to SSH into a machine. And that's fine. Like, I have nothing against PuTTY. PuTTY is awesome. but I had, like it says here, I had these two motivations to check out the new native open client in Windows 10. And I said, well, first of all, SSH was native. I wanted to check that out. And second, I was like, using PuTTY is very much like a Windows thing to do, like to have a separate window. So I said, I kind of want this to be at my command line. Can I do that?
Right.
And so, they're talking about, well, why not Git Bash? And I actually have a reason that I talk about here. What I found is that maybe this has been updated, this document's old, is if you open Git Bash, use the SSH stuff, it would create an open SSH service on your machine. It would just be sitting there in Task Manager. Then if you close Git Bash, reopened it, it would make another one and another one and another one. And next thing you know, you'd have like 15 of them. It just kept creating new instances. And so I said, well, I didn't really want to do this. Like I said here, at the time that I wrote this, WSL was very early. WSL is pretty nice, and you could just use WSL2. But at the same time, I'm like, hey, I just want to do this from Windows. So we'll go through this. I'm not sure if I've done it on this machine, but you can do everything. Once you get this service running, it's really just, all it really is it's a service that is installed on your machine, but it's disabled by default.
Oh, okay.
So I basically just say, let's not make it disabled anymore. And once you do that, you can use SSH on your machine the way you would use it in Linux or Mac or anywhere else. You just use it the same way, and then it all just works. And I found this very useful. Like if I had a Linux machine sitting out on the web somewhere, just SSH into it, done. And you're doing that without using like a client, like a PuTTY or something. And again, PuTTY is great. I don't have anything against PuTTY. It's super awesome. But I just thought, hey, what if I could do this from the command line?
No, I think that's cool. That's really cool.
So we'll have to try this because it's been a while.
I think so.
It's been a while since I have. It's been a while since I've done it, and I'm not even sure if my machine, this particular machine that I'm sitting on, I'm wondering if that service is disabled or not. I don't know. It's just been so long, I forgot.
Yeah. Oh, we can give that another shot. So
yeah. Yeah, we didn't get to C# Dev Kit today. Maybe we'll do that next time.
Yeah.
These have definitely been pop-up streams for now, but if we can settle on some days of the week, we'll let everybody know.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Thanks. That's been fun, Chris.
Yep. And if any of you happen to join us today, we definitely have some viewers. We really thank you for being here. If you missed any part of this, we are on YouTube at youtube.com/TheDevTalkShow. And that's where everything is recorded. You can watch all the past shows. If you are super interested in, maybe Rich showed how he was using Oh My Posh today. We did a whole show on that. It was super fun. It's definitely one of my, boy, was it far enough back that it's not going to show up quickly now? Maybe.
It's videos versus live stream, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So that's one thing that everybody should keep in mind is that, unfortunately, there's the video section, but also the live section. And we do a lot of stuff live, and then it just gets recorded up here. So definitely take a look. Quite a few things over the last couple of years, and we will definitely try to keep adding more. We've had some great guests. We'll see if we can get some more. And other than that, have a great Wednesday, everybody. Thanks for spending some time with me today, Rich.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
And let's see. Oh, you know what I turned off very early in the stream is I turned off our logo, which is now in the upper right. If you love this content, don't hesitate to like or comment, subscribe, follow, whatever platform you're on, and that way you'll get some notifications when we're back. And until then, have a great first day of summer 2023, and we'll talk to you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.